Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Center for Healthy Sex monthly webinar from Mirror of Intimacy, Daily Meditations on Emotional and Erotic Intelligence. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, Clinical Director, and I'm excited today to talk to you, today being Monday, December 3rd, I believe, about abundance. This is one of my favorite topics, so I'm hoping that you will ask questions as we go along. If you want to type things into the text box or chat questions directly anonymously to D. Wagner at centerforhealthysex.com, I'll get your questions and hopefully we'll have a dialogue as we have in the past. So let's think about abundance, especially at this time of year when the earth itself is starting to shift and change and really go into a place of hibernation. And paradoxically, many of us celebrate the month of December, really, I think November and December, as a time of giving gratitude and giving gifts of appreciation to one another. And for some people, December represents a religious holiday. For those who are more secular, it represents a time of giving, as I said before, and there's certainly a lot to give in the world, but we're going to talk today about the art of giving from the heart, not the material giving that we're accustomed to giving at this time of year. So if we look at today's quotation by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, he says, "Love grants in a moment what toil can hardly achieve in an age." And I think that's a really beautiful quote because, like most things, there's a great paradox in that. And I think there's a lot of paradox in the notion of abundance also. So love grants in a moment what toil meaning typically hard work, can hardly achieve in an age. And I was thinking back today on what 2019 brought for me, the changes that occurred, the people that came and went. My own dear father passed away last April, and so that certainly shifted and changed the landscape of my life. But the hard work and the toil of, running an organization like Center for Healthy Sex and the demand it takes to make things go on a daily basis is certainly an act of, simple work. It's also an act of service and an act of giving back what's been given to me. But in the sum total of it, I could look at it and say, wow, this is a beautiful act of something that I and my partner have created, or on a day-to-day basis, it just seems like a job and like work. And then again, there's that paradox. But when I think about this notion of in a moment, however, that I can grant appreciation to, for example, my partner who's built this business with me, that's very different than looking at sort of the year's worth of hard work. The appreciation can be transmitted in a simple eye contact or a nod or a laugh. And so we start this meditation today by saying that measuring abundance only by acquisitions in the world outside our hearts is a tempting trap, because we think of abundance, and especially here in Southern California, as actual material acquisition. The more things I have, the more ways I can display to the world that I've achieved something, the more I have abundance in my life. And if you cultivate an attitude of inner abundance, then you're going to have a very different experience in your personal and sexual life. Because when we are really wanting affection from another person, or wanting attention from another person, or wanting our lover to want us, that moment from another seems to make us light up in ways that buying a new car won't. There's similar feelings, but the feeling of being wanted, of somebody finding you, whether it's with their eyes because they're looking for you, or texting you, or coming by to take you somewhere, is a very different experience than it is acquiring something on our own. And I think that's one of the powerful things about Thanksgiving when it goes well, when you're gathering with people that you love or feel warmth towards or are happy to know, that there's sort of a swelling in our hearts, not to mention our bellies, about the kind of love and affection and the pure sort of beauty of humanity, of those around us, and how generous we can be to each other. And so when we have that validation from another, we start to feel whole and good and full. And when we feel deprived because we feel like we're not getting what we want, or we're not good enough, or we can't get ahead in our careers, or we don't have the right job, we start to collapse into a narrative of scarcity, that I don't have enough, I'm never getting ahead, I'm a loser, poor me. And I mean, the story goes on and on and on. And then, of course, it's very, very easy and not difficult to start to compare oneself, especially when you live in an area, a city like LA, where there's so many disparate socioeconomic displays. You know, one moment I saw a homeless person sleeping on a street corner yesterday, and next to that homeless person sleeping on a street corner is an automobile worth $100,000 on the street. So these wild juxtapositions of wealth and having are very, very great here. So I'm not going to say that the homeless person on the street who's passed out is living an abundant life. I don't mean that at all. And fortunately, those of us on this webinar today are hardly deprived in that way. In fact, if you have the time and the energy to get on a webinar in the middle of your day on a Monday, which is a work day, I would consider that you are a very wealthy and abundant individual, because you have an abundance of time. You also have a desire to deepen and to learn and to grow. And those are the things that we seem to devalue or forget about. And that's what I want to focus on in this conversation. So when we feel we have a distortion of deficiency, when we feel like we're not loved, or we don't have enough, or it's not good enough in some way, this deprivation really deprives us of perspective. And it's, you know, sort of like the saying that these are first world problems, because everyone on this webinar, I would imagine for the most part, can open their refrigerator on any given day and find something to eat there. Maybe it's not the most appealing thing, maybe it's just a piece of cheese, but you have something there. And that makes us so much more abundant than many, many people the world over. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions as I'm talking about this topic of abundance in this moment? And also, please remember that if you're questioning yourself, or you have interest in talking to an intake counselor here at Center for Healthy Sex, that our intake counselors are always available from about 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. And our number is 310-843-9902. So feel free to call us anytime. So somebody writes, speaking of finances, how can one view and achieve abundance if they are struggling financially? What does abundance look like? How does this differ from what our culture and the media tell us? Well, first of all, I think our struggles financially can be a reflection of the lack of abundance that we see in life on a day-to-day basis. So when we start to see that life is truly abundant, when you go out today for a walk, perhaps you have a break from work or you have some free time, and you really start to see the abundance of the universe around you, notice the number of trees and the flowers. Notice the very breath that you're breathing, that we can still breathe oxygen on our planet. And it's largely keeping us alive at this moment. When you see the abundance of cars and the creativity of the human mind in front of you, which is in the form of buildings, like how do people build buildings and set foundations and architecture, and the list goes on and on and on. When you start to see that you live in an abundant universe, then that will start to shift the ways in which you see your current situation. Instead of feeling like it's a current situation of struggle, it's a situation of gratitude, that I'm grateful about what I do have, as opposed to focusing on what I don't have. And again, this is a paradox. This is not some new agey thing where you just imagine abundance and money starts raining from the sky. That's not how it works. But when you start to feel abundant internally in your heart, when you start to trust that you have something unique to offer and say, and you value yourself, then the manifestation of physical abundance, of money, career, etc., starts to unfold before us. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to work. That doesn't mean that you don't have to put one foot in front of the other and do the actual work. That's why I said it's not just some magical thinking that's involved in that. So if you think about, and someone says, I understand what financial abundance looks like, but what does emotional or spiritual abundance look like, or sexual abundance? Well, the task of intimacy requires that we become vulnerable, that we open up our inner lives to another. And even that simple act starts to bring a sense of content to the surface, so we clear away that which is untrue about ourselves. So in other words, when we meet somebody initially, oftentimes it's all about looking good. We're always extolling the virtues of all the good things that we've done, or all the ways that we're smart or creative or ingenious. But we rarely, or we often fail to tell the person that we're getting to know over time, certainly not on the first date. I'm not saying you do that, but certainly by the third, fourth date, you start to talk about your foibles, your shortcomings, your challenges in life. And in so doing, we're clearing away the debris so that we're no longer stuck by not being present or being realistic about who we are. And that is what abundance emotionally starts to look like, is that I am all of these things, good, bad, and ugly, and I want other people to know about this. And this very place of being present, being in the present moment, starts to create an emotional abundance, a spiritual abundance, a sexual abundance, because we're not being limited by these thoughts of lack and limitation. Somebody told me a story recently, and this is not an uncommon story, where two people in a relationship, things were going along well, and then one of the parties started to gain weight, and that person started feeling bad about their body and didn't want to have sex with their partner that much anymore. And their partner didn't really care about the weight gain that much, but they were feeling deprived because their partner is not feeling good about their body, they then can't have sex. And so I would challenge the person who's gained the weight, rather than starting to feel like I'm not good enough and my partner must not want my body, to be able to sit down with the partner and say, hi, you've probably noticed, because I've noticed, that I've gained 10 pounds and I'm not feeling good about myself and I don't feel very sexy. And what I make up about that is that you don't want me either, that you're not turned on by me. And that allows the other person to say, you know what, I have noticed it, but I still love you. Or maybe I find you a little bit sexier because your body is fuller. Who knows what the response might be. Or, yeah, let's maybe start working out together, or taking walks every day, or changing what we're eating. Like, let's be in this together. And that conversation is an intimate act. It's an abundant conversation about all of who we are. And that then leads us to sexual abundance, or maybe a different kind of abundance, because we're in a conversation about it. So I want to make sure that I'm answering that question, and I'm sure I'll continue to come around to it. Derek writes, if you're not financially abundant yet are feeling abundant about your inner life and emotionally, will that attract the right emotional and spiritual partner? And I would say yes. What is financial abundance anyway? What are we talking about? Because we get held up in our culture to this top 1%. There was a time when owning a house made a person middle class. And I was reminded recently that when my parents bought their second house, which they bought after I was born, they spent $19,000 on it. 19,000, imagine that. And this was a house that was blocks from the beach. Of course, it was a small beach town in Florida, but nonetheless, they put their money together. They were in their early 30s and they bought a house and they had 3 kids at that point. And today, we don't get to do that because of the way things have shifted and changed. So if we have the same kind of money my parents had at 30 and we're 30, we start to feel like we're not good enough, as opposed to, you know what, I'm renting an apartment, I have a roof over my head, I have a job, I maybe am not the richest person in the world, but I am financially solvent and I'm abundant and hopefully don't have gross debt and have a way of transporting myself around the city. And so if you feel solid in that and you have a sense of pride and dignity in what you have accomplished, that then will translate to attracting the right emotional and spiritual partner. And maybe you'll meet somebody who doesn't think having, everything in the world is the most important thing. I saw something on Facebook last night about, so I want to be careful here so as not to insult somebody, but it was a show about women's closets, and some woman had built this closet that looked like a department store, and it was filled with merchandise, probably millions of dollars of merchandise. And I was looking at that, thinking of the vulgarity of that. Even if one has that kind of money, to consider the acquisition of that much stuff, to what end? To make me feel good about myself or to show other people I have millions and millions of dollars? When people are starving and the planet is struggling and we're beleaguered today, what is enough is the question for you and for me and for each one of us individually. What makes me feel dignified and good? There are studies that show that people aren't much happier after they're making approximately $50,000 a year. That if they're making $100,000 a year, they're actually not much happier than at the $50,000 range, because $50,000 gets people out of the poverty range. And so what do you need to make you happy? What do you need to make you feel good about yourself and dignified? And when you feel that way, then you'll attract somebody who's like-minded, who's perhaps a conservationist like you are, or who's somebody who just needs, a few things to make them happy, that's not looking to acquire stuff. Paul says the idea of first world problems makes a lot of sense. On an absolute scale, my problems are puny. On a personal scale, a relative scale, my problems are mine and I desire to improve. That's excellent. I'm completely with you there. I think everyone's problem space is always full. How do I reconcile the absolute scale of abundance with the relative scale of abundance? Well, first of all, well said. I think that's what I was trying to get at. And I think that's an inner process, Paul. I think that's an inner grappling all the time. And one of the things that shifted for me many years ago was a practice of affirmation that I was abundant and I was prosperous. And I remember driving down a freeway of all things in LA, which couldn't be more concrete and more stark and really, quite frankly, ugly. There were cars everywhere, and I was affirming that it was an abundant universe. And all of a sudden, I was just dumbstruck by the sheer number of cars on the freeway. And I thought, oh my God, this is abundant. Look at how many cars there are. And when I started to see the many cars, I started to see the many everything. And I started to be in gratitude for what I had. And I think that is a key to inner sort of relaxation, is this notion of I want what I have, as opposed to what I have is never enough. It's not good enough. I always need to chase and acquire something else. And that is the nature of the human mind, because we are constantly seeking salience. It's how our brain is wired. Salience meaning that which has some attraction or meaning to us, whether it's food, clothing, shelter, sex, that which is new and shiny, that which is safe or dangerous. So we're always scanning. And we live in a consumer culture. We live in a very capitalistic world that is always pulling us to spend more, to drive the economy. That what we have, that sweater you bought last month, I don't know, I probably shouldn't have bought that. I should buy a new black sweater, a different black sweater. And then before you know it, you've got 10, 20 black sweaters. And at some point, one black sweater is probably just fine. Maybe two if one's a pullover and one's a cardigan. And so this idea of voluntary simplicity, of really paring things down, getting rid of the clutter that you don't have, giving it to people that are in need, whether you're donating it or just really giving it away. Here in LA, we just had these horrendous fires the last month. So there are plenty of people that need blankets and clothes and a new black sweater that you're not wearing. So first, I would suggest that you go through all of your personal possessions and look at where you blow money unnecessarily, the little things you buy. Does everybody really need to go buy a cup of coffee every day? And when you think about what that costs you versus buying a cup of coffee, if you bought yourself a nice coffee machine that you loved, and you bought yourself a bag of coffee, that would be 10 times more frugal than buying a $3 or $4 coffee every day, because that's $120 a month if you buy one every day for 30 days. So you just think about how much money you're spending and saving over the year. And then you'll start to feel the relative shift between what you're buying and what you're spending. And then you have to struggle internally with what has meaning to you, which is kind of a long-winded answer to your question. What do I want? What do I need? When I buy that thing, am I producing more landfill? Or is it something that I know that I'll use or I'll wear a lot? And these are the kind of questions I debate with myself all the time when it comes to consumption. Because you can strangle yourself with tchotchkes in your house, and it just ends up being junk that you won't want or have. And one of the ways to do this is to pretend like you're moving. If you were moving tomorrow and you decided, I'm moving from here in a month, and you went through every single closet and drawer and your clothes, I promise you would be shocked at the amount of stuff that you would get rid of. You could probably furnish another household, whether you live in a studio apartment or a 4-bedroom house, you could furnish another household with the amount of stuff that you've been storing. And then it also brings into sharp relief how many things we buy that we actually don't really need. So Joel says, as a recovering sex addict, a couple of years into recovery, my relationship with my spouse doesn't include sex or affection. How do I transfer my outlook from one of scarcity and deprivation to one of peace and abundance? Well, first of all, congratulations on your recovery for a year. I know that's no easy feat. And it seems to me that you have to decide whether this relationship is the right relationship for you. And that's a conversation between you and your partner. Because a relationship that doesn't include sex is one thing in early recovery, but not including in affection is very painful. And there's a starkness in that and a deprivation in that is not abundant. So if you are in agreement and you are willing to live in a relationship that is sexless and lacks affection, then you're going to have to shift your perspective to saying, I cohabitate with this person who is in effect my companion and my friend, if indeed you are friends and have a friendship, and I'm never going to have sex or affection with this person, but I'm making a choice to live in this configuration, and therefore I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful that I have a companion. I'm grateful that I'm not lonely. I've got somebody to go to a movie with or have dinner with every day, but I don't expect that it's going to shift or change because this is the agreement that the two of you have. Now, if you haven't talked about this explicitly, if you haven't sat down and said, hey, what are we doing here? And are we going to continue in this fashion? Then that's the first thing you have to do. Because I don't think it's smart to shift to the gratitude for my deprivation. There's something off about that. Which is different than shifting to the gratitude of the situation that I've co-created and that I am in agreement with and that I want. So, for example, if I live in a house or in a space and I know that it's not optimal for whatever reason, that it's noisy, or that the plumbing isn't great, or it doesn't have great heating in the winter, but the rent is really great, and so I'm making a compromise to live here, then I'm going to be grateful for the fact that it doesn't have the best heating in the winter. So I'm going to make sure I have a warm blanket, or a space heater, or do the things I need to do to make sure I'm cozy and it's good enough. And winter doesn't last that long, and here in California it's really not that cold, so I'm going to tolerate and live with this so I don't feel deprived. I'm going to make myself warm enough so I don't feel deprived. But if I don't take the actions I need to take care of myself, and I'm just shivering and I'm miserable and I'm living in deprivation, that is not a way of changing my outlook to scarcity, because I'm living in scarcity. So what do you have to do to have a conversation with your partner to be able to move towards a feeling of abundance and gratitude? Or do you need to leave the relationship and move on? Somebody asks, how do you get into an abundant mindset or see abundance during something like a divorce when everything feels so insecure and scarce? I would point you into the direction of my longtime friend's book, Catherine Woodward Thomas, Conscious Uncoupling. She does an extraordinary job of pointing us all in the direction of seeing the process of divorce, for as painful as it is, as an opportunity to grow, as an invitation to grow, and as an invitation to love that person while you say goodbye to them. I just can't say enough about how useful that book is, because when you start to feel that the pain that you're having, the grieving that you're having, the perspective you're getting about how you made the choice to marry the person you married, why the relationship didn't work out, where that's left you, and you see that you are abundantly full of grief and pain and sorrow, that will shift your perspective. And, as human beings, we run from those feelings. We don't want to feel them. We'll happily move towards addiction, whether it's the next chocolate bar or the next pair of shoes, or the next time we get to go to Vegas and gamble, or sex with somebody we don't really like or care about. We will happily move towards that fleeting feeling. But when it comes to pain and sorrow and grief and loss, we want to run, as opposed to recognizing the gift that we have for being able to feel the depth of our souls in that way. After all, you can't know joy if you don't know deep sorrow. You can't know love and laughter if you don't know pain. You've got nothing to compare it to. So consider that you are in a very tender time right now, that this is a time of great beauty, and time for self-compassion and care. And when you can see that compassion and care and pain as abundant, then you will shift your perspective and recognize also that this too shall pass, that you won't be feeling these feelings forever, but you must feel them so you can heal and learn and move on, so that you're not dragging all of that into your next relationship. So please take a look at Conscious Uncoupling. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. How does all this relate to the law of attraction? Is there any truth to that concept? Well, I think there is. And also, since we're talking about Catherine right now, you might also want to look at her book, Calling in the One, which is all about the laws of attraction. And of course, The Secret, which I think came out in the late 90s or the 2000s, is about the law of attraction also. That we have some pretty vaunted human powers when it comes to our capacity to see into the future, to vision, to imagine something. There's a saying that if you can conceive it, or if you can conceive it in your mind, you can achieve it. So if you can visualize something, you can make that thing happen by putting one foot in front of the other and doing it. And in so doing, you will attract people around you that are like-minded, that are headed in the same direction you're headed in. And a good example of that is if you've ever been addicted to anything, if you've ever been an alcoholic or drug addict or sex addict, and you look back on that time when you were in your addiction, who did you attract? You attracted people that were drinking and using. You attracted people whose lives were a mess. that were constantly in flux and drama, like perhaps your own was, or people that were hurting you or using you. And when you get into recovery and you start to get sober, you're attracting people around you that are sober. That's what 12-step meetings are filled with, by the way. And even if you aren't in a program, if you are hanging around with people that aren't positive, people that aren't looking for personal growth and development, then you're going to be hanging around with people. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about lower companions, which is a little judgmental, but there's something to it. Or all of our grandmothers used to say, birds of a feather flock together. So if you are looking around yourself and saying, wow, I don't have people around me that are really going someplace, then you should examine your circle of friends, examine your deprivation. What are the things in your life that you're tolerating? Piles of junk on your bedside table, junk in the trunk of your car, people that aren't good for you, relationships, old, clothing and stuff that you need to get rid of. Once you cleanse your environment, because I think that is enormously helpful, because it starts to move stuff away and move us out of the clutter, then it becomes about, where do I meet like-minded people? What kind of clubs, organizations, meetups, groups, classes do I want to take so I can start to attract the people to me that I want to be around? And will the ideas in conscious uncoupling transfer from divorcing a person to divorcing from a religion? I actually think they would. If you're able to take that leap of faith, and my sense is you're smart enough based on what you've written thus far, that you could. I find it incredibly useful, even for people who aren't actively divorcing, but they're thinking about divorcing. The first part of the book sets you up for that. The second part of the book is what to do if you're actually divorcing. But this notion of happily ever after is one of the notions that she unpacks. So I would suggest that you take a look at that, even if you're divorcing from a religion, that there is a blind obedience in religions, certainly. And while they're not advertising happily ever after, they are advertising that this is the answer to your ills. And so to look at, where do those traditions come from? I also want to let you know that Calling in the One is, it looks like Doug did just post the URL for Catherine's books, but in January, we will be posting an interview I did with Catherine as part of my monthly vlog for Mirror of Intimacy. So I got to interview her, and you get to hear her talk about that book also in those tenets. But yeah, I think if that appeals to you, you might take a look at and read the blurb on Amazon, and then creatively use it towards that end, if you're uncoupling from anything, really. All right, so if you can show up and experience every moment in a different way, that indicates your desire to put your attention on abundance. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do today is to focus on the abundance in your life. And when we get off the call, just start by the room you're sitting in. How about the chair that you're sitting in right now? That you actually have a chair to sit in, that you have warm clothing on. That you start to take and look at the things that you take for granted, that you see every day but don't see, and start to notice how grateful you are that you have these things. And with that goes what I was talking about before, the way our perception forms our reality. You can look at something and say, oh, that's so old, or that's so weird, or I've had it for so long. Or say, wow, I'm really glad that I have that thing. And aren't I lucky to even be able to have it? When you see, what's happening in countries like Yemen, or people that are in these refugee camps at the border at Tijuana, it just puts things into a perspective, and that's not a Pollyanna-ish perspective. It's real. It's really real that you are not a refugee in a refugee camp at a border right now, starving or dying of some illness or bombs going off around you. You start to see the incredible wealth that you have. And I used to have a teacher who said, it's as if you're starving and you're sitting at the feast and you don't even know it, because you're complaining that, the bread's kind of stale on the sandwich, as opposed to, I've got a sandwich. At least I have what I have. And that goes, for our parents and our family members and the dysfunctional crazy that we might have come from. To start to put into perspective how we got to where we are today is a way of practicing gratitude. So when you accept and honor the abundance in the life-giving properties of your own personal reality, and that includes your present problems, by the way, because I think somebody wrote that earlier, that our problems are our problems. They don't go away. Shit happens every day, right? My niece yesterday was telling me she got into a fender bender. It's like, oh, well, she's 25. Welcome to your first fender bender. I mean, life is going on all the time. And so we can look for the opportunities in those problems to stretch and grow ourselves, because we don't grow without stress. If you lived in a bubble, you would be weak all the way around. So all of these things that aggravate us every day are opportunities for us to become more intellectually facile, more emotionally facile, more able to relate, be intimate, lift heavy things, move things around. So see all of it as abundant. And see all of it as the opportunity to stretch your mind for growth. Derek says, all addictions are diseases of perception, so also see that you have the ability to help others, as it is the best way to build self-esteem and spiritual abundance. And I would say hallelujah to that, Derek, that we always think that we don't have anything to give. And I really want to challenge that all the time also, because I think there are daily acts of creativity, daily acts of service, daily acts of giving in the way that Derek's talking about, whether you open the door for somebody or put a quarter in somebody's meter because it's running out. These daily random acts of kindness are an enormous form of practicing abundance. And people think they have to, build a building with their name on it, or write a book, or, do some grandiose thing in order to feel like they've accomplished or done something. And that's not true. What's really true are the simple acts of giving of our hearts every day, of saying thank you, of saying hello and goodbye, and giving the abundance of your heart. And even if it's hard for you, even if you tend to be isolating or avoidant or shy, challenge yourself to stretch in these ways every day, to make eye contact, to smile, to say hello. That is an unbelievable gift of abundance. Sorry if I missed this, but how is abundance different than gratitude? Well, I do think it's different. Abundance is about a state of being, of feeling full, of feeling like I have what I need. It can also be a recognition of the things that I have. So we're talking about an internal state of abundance and an external state of abundance. Being in gratitude for what I have is what gives me abundance. Because if I'm not in gratitude for it, I don't see it. If I'm not in gratitude, I'm living in a place of lack and limitation. I don't have enough, or it's not good enough, or I should throw that thing away and get a new one because it's old for whatever reason fashion states. So these are fine slices. I think grace is part of this triumvirate, that when we see the abundance we have and we live in gratitude, that's when I think grace happens. And when I think of grace, I think of sort of ordinary miracles or everyday magic, or like, oh yeah, of course that happened because I was feeling really grateful about something, and then something appeared in my life, which I wasn't thinking about or didn't know about. And oftentimes these things that we're seeking or wanting are right under our nose. We just have not paid attention to it. So what I'm saying is that you want to stretch your mind and your heart so that you have room to grow, so that you have room to take in the abundance around you and be grateful for what you have. And that makes a space for the law of attraction, for magic, or for what I'm calling grace also. And with that, what you have to offer the world is enough. Think about that, that you are enough, that you are abundant, that you're an expression of an abundant universe, and that you have a lot to give on any given day. And your sexual potential, an expression of what it is exactly as it needs to be today. It's not bad, it's not good, it just is what it is today. And so be grateful for the body that you have. So often, I talk to people and they don't like their body parts, they feel ashamed of this or that. People don't want to show their bodies to each other today because there's so much porn and fashion that nobody measures up to any of that, but it's not what real bodies look like anyway. So be grateful that you have 2 feet, 2 legs, that you have genitals that you can have sex with, good, bad, or otherwise, that you have a belly and chest or breasts, and that you have your eyesight and every other thing that you have that makes you capable in the world today. And the more gratitude you have for your own body, the more free you'll feel in your sexuality as well, and free you'll feel with a partner. Someone writes, what if your life has been saturated with overabundance? How can you find joy in things that aren't extreme or overstimulating? Well, then I would recommend that when you're talking about overabundance, I don't know if that means that you've had too many material possessions or were given too much. I would recommend that you start to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, that you stop surrounding yourself with too much and start to give service, perhaps working with people that are underprivileged. Put yourself in situations with people that are just grateful to have something or anything. I was at the grocery store on Sunday, and there was a man there looking at the food bar, the hot food bar for breakfast. And I was watching him pacing back and forth, and he looked at me and he said, "Do you have any change?" And the truth is, I didn't have a dime in my wallet. I maybe had 2 pennies. And I said to him, I don't have any change, but I'll buy you breakfast. I'll buy you whatever you want. And so he, got a container and got what he wanted. And I walked with him to the checkout counter and I charged his breakfast for him. And that moment, the money I spent on that was infinitely more fulfilling for me, whatever it was, $12, $14, than giving him $14 or buying myself, more importantly, a $14 candle or soap or some other dumb thing that I really don't need. So think about the ways that you can give and that can fill your heart with gratitude on any given day, that is really simple and in your own environment. That's not some big grand thing like you have to go move to India and feed homeless there, or go build a house for Habitat for Humanity. That's fantastic if you can afford to do that. But for most of us on any given day, what can we do to touch another human being that ultimately touches us, which is precisely what Derek was saying about giving service, that it's the act of service that builds self-esteem, internal abundance, and spiritual abundance as well. So the daily sexual or healthy sex acts today talks about what moves you is to look at your surroundings now and ask yourself, what do I love? What beauty do you see? And when you can love and see beauty wherever you are, no matter where you are, you connect with abundance, which attracts abundance. So even if you're on an off-ramp on a freeway that's not very attractive, when you look at the beauty of the curvature of that off-ramp and think about, wow, some human being conceived that in their mind. What a wildly creative idea. And then there were engineers that understood how to put it together. And then people that actually went out there and worked and laid that smooth concrete and every other thing that makes that thing happen. You start to see beauty in just about everything. So start to see life through those eyes, the eyes of possibility and abundance, not taken for grantedness, not deprivation. And someone finally writes, can you tell me something about sensual and sexual feelings of abundance and material and financial abundance and self-esteem? Well, I think sensual and sexual feelings of abundance have to do with what we give, not just what we're receiving, but how generous of a lover are you? I've had many men talk about over the years how they can be selfish sexually because they habituated themselves to, being with sex workers or other people that they were using anonymously. And it was all about, what can I get? What can I get? What can you give me? How can you make me feel good? And when you start to switch that around to, what can I give? How can I give pleasure to my partner? How can I make my partner feel good? How can I care for them and make their life a little bit easier? Whether it's through touch or love or buying them a blueberry muffin today at 4 o'clock. What are the ways that you can sensually transmit the abundance of heart that you have? Then you'll answer that question for yourself. And this thing about material and financial abundance and self-esteem, I think I addressed when we started this conversation, but there is a difference between the two, and I do think they're highly tied together and very paradoxical. And it doesn't even have to be about how much you spend on something. It's about valuing what you have. So do you take care of what you have? You can buy an article of clothing from, Target or Walmart, if that's what you can afford, because they have some pretty cool fashions today, or going to, a discount store and buying that thing, and maybe you spend $15, $20 on it, but it fits you nicely and it makes you feel dignified and it makes you feel good about yourself. If you take that thing home and you wash it and care for it and fold it and hang it up, you'll have it for a very long time. And when you put it on, you feel good about yourself. On the other hand, you can go into an expensive store and buy something, that same item, for $100 and $150 and wear it, and then trash it. Take it off, throw it on the floor, don't have it dry cleaned, water it up, throw it in the back of your car. And in short time, it will be garbage and you won't feel good when you put it on. So you'll just buy something new. And the latter is incredibly unconscious and wasteful because you're not tending to the earth, for one thing. And that clothing and all of that is ultimately landfill. So is what you're wearing, it's how you're wearing it. It's not the thing itself. It's, do you wear it with dignity? Do you wear it with confidence? Do you feel good about the fact that you were able to provide it for yourself and take care of it? Or is it wearing you because it's about status and you want people to know what you spent on it? And that makes you feel good until the thing is not hip or cool anymore. So these are all the sort of crazy making things that we have to sort out in our own heads that define who we are. And again, I leave you with the question of, what is enough? How much is enough? And what makes you feel, abundant and good and dignified about who you are? So I hope you have an abundant December. I hope you shower love and affection and sensuality and sexuality to those where it's appropriate, and that you give of your heart wherever you can. So think about giving with your heart instead of your pocketbook this December. If you do buy gifts for the people around you, maybe they're small, interesting things that are uniquely special to who they are, without spending a fortune on something to make some kind of impression. Find out who the people are around you that you love deeply. What are their favorite colors or scents or quirky little things that you know that they would absolutely enjoy? And go for that and the spirit of giving, as opposed to the thing itself. All right, have a happy holiday, happy and safe New Year, and I look forward to talking to you in 2019.